Hi and welcome back. This is part 3 of the MDriven Designer overview. Let's head right back in under the play button where we had the system prototyper. We have looked at the new debugger that looked like this, but this button, Run Model and Continue Modeling, is also interesting. If we push that one, we get this window, and that actually is possibly our running application. And this also has a model refresh, so if we do changes in our model, this one can reread to reflect the changes. To actually execute an application, we need some kind of menu. This is just the administrative menu where you can choose styles and refresh the model. But how do we get a menu in here so that we could view our view model, or a rendered view of our view model? Actually, we do that by adding an action in the action dialog. So the actions editor, if we click that one up, it looks like this. And we could create a new global action. Global actions are actions that show up in the global menu in a prototype application. So I'm going to add a new global action. And when I select that in the grid, I get the properties here to change if I need to. So if this is just default name, new global action, it has the ability to have an enabled expression. And again, it's the OCL. It has the ability to have access groups. We're gonna look at that later on. And there's also a possible execute expression. Again, it's OCL, but the action language. Remember, OCL with side effects that actually can change data. But what we are going to use now is bring up a view model, the house view, the one that we did. So let's leave it at that at first, and we head back to this window and we reread the model. For some reason it got big again. And now we have the new global action as a menu. This is as we see it here, it's rendered with spaces between each camel case part of the word new global action 1. But what we named it to was just the camel case, new global action 1. Why is that? That is because we left the presentation as the default. And when the presentation is left like this, just stating that we should use the name, we run this algorithm to hack up the name on each capital case. So now this action, what it should do is bring up the house view. So let's see if it does that. And it does. So we see a couple of interesting things here. This side is the view, and this side is saved for any actions that are valid in this view. They will be listed here. What we notice immediately is that the Create Street button got really large, and that is because it's at the end of at the bottom of the view model, and anything that is at the end of the view model and rendered by this rendering engine, which uses WPF, Windows Presentation Foundation, will be extended to the bottom. So that's actually a feature to enable us to have UI that fills out the view and scales with the view if we were to drag it like this. So in order to mitigate this, we should make sure that this isn't touching the end. There's a couple of ways of doing that, but I'm gonna choose to say that there's a explicit row count in this view model. If I turn on grid lines, I can see that it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows, but here it states 0. 0 just means that it will adapt to the highest needed position from the things that we have placed here. So if we look at our action that is rendered as the button, it actually says it's placed on row 4. Row 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's correct. If we were to move this to here, it would say row 5, and then this one expands. But what we want to do is to avoid having this at the bottom. So let's say there's 7 rows in the grid. Now there's an empty row in between. We can move that up again. There's 2 empty rows, and that would be rendered as, if we were to refresh the model, like that. So that's more like what we want to see. So now what we will notice here is that this won't take any edits as of yet. Everything disappears. Even if we do the Create Street, nothing sticks. And this was expected, because if we look at our view model, it's rooted in a house. But if we look at the action, the view model root object is not set. So what we see here is an empty shell. It isn't backed by a house. To mitigate this, we can either create a house as part of the action. So in the view model root object, we would do house create, and if we then reread the model, first ask me, since I have changes, and the changes are actually that I created a street that I tried to tie to an empty house or to a null house. Would you like to save it? No. And every time, let's see, every time I push the model refresh, this view goes really big. Why is that? Let's fix that once and for all. It's actually this one, screen size, that we have set to something quite large. If we were to change it to, let's say, 800 by 600 and do a model refresh, then it sticks this way. Okay. But what we were working at as the new global action is actually backed by a house. So now when I click the street number should stick, the create street should stick. But notable is also that the save button is lit up and the cancel button. So if I were to save this and do a new global action, I actually create a house by clicking this action. Okay. Normally you wouldn't like the action to be placed like this. This is more like you expect a sub-menu from it. To create the sub-menus, we could assign the global action to a menu group. A menu group, we don't have any as of yet, so we could create some. Click up this dialog and add a menu group. Let's call this one file. Let's add another one called views. And we want to sort this so that file, let's add another one, edit. We want to have this one first and this one second and this one third. So now we have some groups that are global to our model, and we can assign our action to a group. I'm going to assign it to the views group, and if I now reload the model, I got the views with the new global action under it, so that's better. But I didn't get the file or the edit menus because those are just groups without any actions in them. There's actually a button here, create and init standard actions. Let's see what it does. So it says you already have some actions defined. You still want to create the standard actions. Yes. It added some actions. Maybe it also added some groups. Yes, it's added one group. But that's fine. So let's look at what the actions were that it added. It added a save action that's not backed by anything but a framework action. The framework actions are save, refresh, undo, redo, exit, business delete, and do modal OK. So those are the choices for the framework actions. Save is actually just saving the state of the view. The refresh will, in an environment where we work against a persistence server like the MDriven server or turnkey application, a refresh will reread data that has changed in the database since we read it to the view. Exit will try and exit the application undo and redo. Obvious, they will try to undo the latest changes that the user has done or redo them. And then we have our new global action that we started with. So refreshing the prototype will give us file, exit, refresh, save, and edit will have redo and undo, and the views will have the new global action, and the styles allow us to optionally set another VPF style. Okay, so new global action, and we could create a street and set something here, and then we could go edit, undo, or edit, redo, or we could go save like this, right? Normally redo and undo is backed by Control Z and Control Y. So if we would want to do something like that, we could say that down here, menu group, this is the undo, it's in the menu group edit, shortcut key, set, and control. And the redo should have shortcut key, Y, and control. Let's see that's stuck, yeah. And then if we were to reread the model, we see that they have been backed by these shortcut keys. So view, new global action, undo. Oh, that wasn't what I was supposed to show. I should press Control set, like that. All right. If I now save the changes that we have so far, I will notice there's an error showing up. And what it says is there's a new global action that sets a root object for the house view, but the house view doesn't require a root object. So why do we set one? This is just a helper to make our design consistent. So to address this warning, we should open up the house view and say that it requires a root object, because this view is no good without a backing house. So if we were to check this one, it requires a root object, and save again, that triggers the error finding in the model. We could have pushed that one as well, of course. We see that the warning is gone. Okay. So our model looks kind of weird. We're gonna clean it up a bit. And remember, if I'm just press delete and not control delete, I only remove things from view. So I press delete, delete. I only remove these from this diagram. and this one is not a squared line, and I would like it to be squared, so I press the shortcut key for that, Control L, like this, and this one as well, like that. And class 2 doesn't really help us anything. Let's say that this is a person with a first name and last name, like that. And the association clause between person and house could be a lease contract, that we have a lease on an apartment in the house maybe. So that would state apartment number as an integer that's possibly nullable. And maybe it should state the rent as a double. Now I just pressed Control while using the thumb wheel on the mouse to scroll in or scroll out. It will scroll where my mouse is pointing. So if I point it here and scroll, it will stay in view. Scrolling out, I want to look closer to this one, and I point it and Control and the mouse wheel in or out. So on a lease contract, it will be important to also give some dates. So I'm gonna add a start date. And this is actually a feature that when we parse the data that you put into this edit, we start from left to right. So in order to be quick, so if you just start to write, start date, and then continue with colon, date, time, question mark, enter. That's what you will get. It's a little bit faster. End date, time, question mark, like that. So that might be a good lease contract for us. So we should probably call this one tenants. Is it spelled that way? I don't know. I'm gonna pause and Google. Should be one and like that. And I will call this apartments. So the person can have multiple rented apartments, multiple. Each one is backed by a lease contract, and the house can have multiple tenants that are persons. And that makes sense to me now when I'm doing this model. But of course, depending on the requirements, it maybe will look totally different when meeting an actual domain, doing actual work. So that's the point of modeling, finding the requirements that are right for a particular use case. So what about this link? What should it mean? Maybe if we change this one to owned houses, and we would change this one to owned. So now the rules say that a house only has one owner, owned by, but the person can own many houses. Okay, so now we have just cleaned up the model a bit. I'm gonna move in the street closer. That didn't turn out very well, like that. And the location. So what about the location? Maybe to motivate the generalization of location, maybe we just should add a city like that, and a name of the city that also is backed by, that has a position property. And then it would be appropriate to have that a street is in 101 city and the city has multiple streets. That would make sense. Okay, save. We haven't done anything to actually change the views, so heading back to the prototyper, which we often refer to as WECPOF. Why is it called WECPOF? Well, when we started, MDriven framework was named ECO, Enterprise Core Objects, ECO. And then when we found that it was a good match to render things in VPF, we sort of merged the ID to Enterprise Core Objects and VPF. So that's the story behind the crazy name that bothers some, but hey, it's just a name. It's not important. But when you hear us refer to the engine WECPOF, we often talk about the idea to take a purely declarative design with the view models to a running application. And actually, the idea to do this is implemented in many more ways than just VPF, Windows Presentation Foundation. It's implemented in, like in Turnkey with AngularJS and MVC for the web, and actually we have it all over the place. It's also in Windows Forms and ASP.NET. So the idea is larger than Windows Presentation Foundation. Okay. Let's add a slightly more another view model to give us an access point to the houses. Let's call this one all houses to start with. And we say that it's in the typed context of house. But now we can add the column or the nested view model column multilinks. Got a problem with this showing outside of the screen. House all instances. let's see what happens if we just follow the model. So this pops out because we said it was of class house. So then the view model editor suggests that maybe you want to use house all instances. And all instances is an OCL operator to show everything of that particular class. So that's a practical way to start on information sets that are small. And initially everything is small, so it's a good start. So what happened here? It added this view model column with the OCL expression house all instances. And if we were to look at the resulting type of this, it's a collection of house. So it's basically houses. And then it added this blue nesting view model class. And it connected this column to this one. So how come these aren't connected? It should look like this. That was a new one, I haven't seen that before. So the house all instances points out associated to all house. So these are all made up names, but let's call this one house grid. And whenever the view rendering engine sees this type of construction, there's something that is creating a list, and you have properties on each object in the list. It will suggest that we should render it as a grid. And to make I'm going to switch off the grid lines. The grid lines are for the complete area that we render in, and this is a rendered grid. If we switch the designer style of the rendered data, it might be more clear what happens. Well, that didn't work as expected. Let's see if I switch. Yeah, like this. I had to switch back and forth to make it stick. So this is rendered as a grid, and if I add properties, I can either just add a generic column, and then I will have to write my expression, OCL expression, what should be in it myself, or I can just pick from what the view model editor suggests based on the type information. So let's pick the street number, and now the street number ends up here, and it ends up as a column in the grid. So if I continue like this, I can add a state, and then the state ends up here. And I'm gonna add a generic column that I can name to something, but first we're gonna do the expression. So what do we want to do? Maybe we want to list who owns it. So as we are in context of house, we have access to the roles of the associations of house. House has an association owned by, as we see here. So let's follow that one. And then we are in context of the resulting type is person. And person has first name and last name. Okay, so let's take the last name of, that wasn't supposed to happen. Let's take the last name, like that. So self, owned by, and last name. And this is really easy to navigate through associations like this. We can navigate as far as we want and need in OCL. So that is really great when designing a fully normalized information model where everything is stored only once and reused whenever needed. So that forces us to collect things together to present the needed information in one context, or as we would like to call it, in one view model. So now when I have the last name of the owner, I can name the column last name of owner. So this is another view, and I would like to have a global action for bringing up this view. This view actually isn't backed by doesn't need to be backed by a specific house, because it doesn't make use of anything of the root object. It just use the class and use the class operator all instances. If I right click this one, I get an option to add a global action for create or a global action for show. So this is just a shortcut to, let's see what happens if I do this. In the action dialog, a new action was created, show all houses. So that was what that helper method did, show all houses. It brings up the view model all houses. But what it didn't do is sort it into a menu group. So I will add that myself. It should be in the views, like that. So that would mean that if I head back here and refresh the model, I should have another one called show all houses that shows a grid where all the houses that I have created before are available. All right. So now something interesting happens. What we really wanted to do with showing a single house that we have in our other view model, this one, ideally we would just like to point at one here and have this one backing this one. So maybe this one shouldn't be brought up by a global action at all. Instead, it should be brought up by either an action of this object or an action of this view. All right, so we have two options. We could either do a view model action that is endemic to a specific view. Let's try that first. In the all houses, we can push this button, action definitions, which just applies a filter to the actions definitions that is this: show view model actions only, not the global actions and not the class actions, and filter on this view model, all houses. So the only thing this did was to filter this, that initially looked like this, shows all actions. And incidentally, we can push this one to show all actions. But from here, action definitions for this view are these: show all actions. But we want to do it for this view. All right. So we want to do a new view model action. That's an action that only exists in a certain view. So when I create one, I get a new view model action that only in view model all houses. And within all houses, I only want it to show in house grid. And when it's executed, I want it to bring up the house view. And the view model root object for the house view should be, what should it be? Let's bring up the OCL editor. It should be the current object of the house grid. That would make sense. We're gonna get back to the vCurrent and the vSelected soon. So now we have created a new action that's only visible in the all houses view model and only for objects of the house grid, and it will bring up the view model house view and setting the root of the house view to the current row of the house grid. Let's see how that plays out in the prototyper. Refreshing the model. Views. Show all houses. So when I select one here, this one should bring up just the one I'm pointing at. So this is the one with the, let's go back. And now I see that the street number 444, new, that's the street number there, 444, back. So if I were to bring this one up like that and set the street number 123, save that, hit back, and then I see it's 123. So this is a way to tie view models, or views rather, together. So this is a really bad name for this action. Let's name it show house. Model refresh, views, show all houses, show house. And just a few short notes on how the WECPOF engine works. If we were to hold down Control key while we press the action show house, it would actually add another tab to show the data in. So this way we could bring up another one like that. And notice this green dot, it's actually it signals that there's a object root connected to this view. So this one doesn't have a green dot because that doesn't have a rooted house to start with, but these do. and also double click on a row in a grid will check the actions lists for actions that navigates, like this one. It will take the first navigating enabled action and execute it. So if I were to double click on this one while holding control, it would bring that one up, and I don't need to use the action. So that's a practical way to navigate. And double clicking without holding control, of course, will replace the content in this view like this, but the back will bring me one step back, just like in a web browser. So I'm back to the all houses like that. So these are some of the functionalities of the UI engine that we use here. Also notice that the text on the tabs here are actually the as string representation of the rooted object. And do you remember from part 1 where we got that from? In the house we had set the default string representation as an OCL expression to the street name and the street number as string. And just to prove a point, we could add something else here for read, like that, and heading back to here and refreshing the model and showing all houses. We have the for real representation here, and if we were to double click one, we have the for real representation there. Okay, as I said, with the action that we added, we had two options: either do an action, that's also, the actions are visible here, you use this one to fold it or to show it. We could either have done an action endemic to this view, as we did a view model action, and if we would double click this, we would get that selected and see that it is a view model action. Action type navigates from all houses to house view. And if we were to click this, it will actually show us the view model that it navigates to, and that's the house view. And then we could click there to jump back to the ones that we have looked at before. And this icon is actually to opt it out, not to show it in this scenario. And opted outs are available here, and we can opt it back in. Up here we see all the actions that leads to a certain view. So actions leading here are from the main menu, views, the view group, views, and show all houses. And if I were to jump to the house view model, I can see there are two actions leading here. Either one, the views new global action that we did as a starter action, or the view model action in all houses called show house. And I can navigate to these two by clicking them there. Actually, we might as well drop this global action from the main menu that created a house. It's not really the correct way to do it. Delete action. which leaves us in an interesting situation. We have no way to create new houses currently. We will need to add that to the maybe to the all houses view. So in here we might as well add a new view model action with a different purpose. Add new house. And instead of having it navigate, that it should do if we have set the bring up view model, we might as well give it an execute expression instead. Execute expression. And what we want it to do is just house dot create. And that would be enough. So, not saying only in this will give us this look. Add new house is available under all houses, under this one, the root, but also in the house grid. Add new house. So that's not very intuitive for the user to see the add new house in two places. So we could either opt one of them out, or we might as well instruct the action that it should only show in the all houses on the root. That's, if you think about it, it's the only place where it makes sense, on the root, because if you have no houses, we still want to be able to create a house, so even if the grid is empty. So only in this all houses made it disappear from the house grid. Heading back to the prototyper, refreshing the model, views, show all houses. I now have a new action, add new house. And as you see, house.create was all it took to create the new house, and the all instances picks this up by subscription and adds a row to the grid, a rendering of the new house that we created. And of course I can immediately double click it to execute the first navigating action to set some properties of it, 4, 5, 6, and head back 4, 5, 6. But I can just cancel all this out like that. Discard changes, yes please. Okay. But what I actually were about to say is that we had two options before. To either do view model actions that are endemic to a certain view, or a class action, which are available wherever a class is visible. Let's do a class action that does the same thing as show house, just to see what the difference is. Show house from, well, it's really from object, from a house object. So it's an action on the class house, and the bring up view model should be house view, and the view model root object. And now it's interesting because now we are in the context of a house, so we might as well just do self. So the root object expression is just self in this case. And if we head back to the view model editor, we see that show house from object will show up in these two places. And if we were to reread the model here and show all houses, we see that it's available here and it's available here, but both are disabled, because even if the action is potentially available, it needs an object to act on. And this one will never have an object because our view is not rooted in a house, it's null. But this one that supports the grid should be able to get an object once we select one. So when I select one, this one is enabled, and this one will do the same thing as the other one. But here we see an interesting thing, that since this action is available wherever the object is shown, it's also available from here. So show house from object will automatically show up here because this is a house. So heading back to our view model editor, we probably first would like to opt out the show house from object on the root level, because that will always be disabled. Away with that. Now it lives here. That's fine. And in the house view, it's not really helpful to the user to have an action that points back at the same object in this case. So we want to opt that out as well, like that. Model refresh, views. So once we select one, it's enabled and we can click it and it's not shown here. So that's more like what we want. So keeping track of actions and what's available and opted out, etc., can be quite the work in the end. And this is true for all applications. What navigates where to track things, and how can you get here? At least with our strategy, fully modeled and fully declarative, you will have all the information readily available for you. And also we have a special view, the action crossref, that renders like this. So actions leading here are show house and show house from object. So that's one way of getting to the house view. But there is an action show house from object that is opted out. If I would like to opt it in, I can just click the line and then it would be green. So that would mean that this action is available again from here. But since I don't want that, I will opt it out and then it's gone. So from the all houses, I see that there is an action show all houses that leads here, and there are these actions available to the user from this UI. There's one called add new house, and there's a show house from object, which potentially is available from the root, but in our case it's not. We don't want that, so that's opted out, red. And there are these two that are available from objects in the grid. So that's one way to cross-references to find cross-reference for the actions. Another way to follow through is to to let's show all actions here and show house from object, and here we see a hint that action shows in one place. 2 places are opted out. Let's get an overview by following this view, and that is rendered like this. All the view models where this action may come into play, and remember that was a class action, so it will come into play wherever the class is viewed. And if it's opted out, red, or opted in, green. So here we get a way to see how the actions interact with each other. We also have I'm gonna close that one and go back to the overview. If you remember from part 1 of this series, we had the view models option here in the overview. It didn't show anything when we showed it before, but now it shows the 2 view models. And we also have the action navigations and view models that we could refresh like this, and then we see that we have a navigation tree or a storyboard or something like that. Views, show all houses, goes to the show houses, and from there we have show house and show house from object. But this one is shown elsewhere, namely here. So as your application grows, this tree will grow. And if we were to have any view models that has been stale, not able to reach them from any action, they would show up here. And the last one, the 3D rendering should, okay, it is. So these are all the classes that are available in the model, and an auto-generated diagram for that. And this is the view models available, and the classes and the diagrams. So as I said, this is still work in progress. We're gonna find a way to make this usable, but currently it's just like eye candy. Right. So gonna round this session up. It was a session on how actions tie together with view models, basically. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back.